Hey there! Before we dive into animating text layers in After Effects, don't forget to download the main folder of the course, with all the necessary materials. That way, you can follow along with me through the lessons. Next, let's talk about getting Adobe After Effects set up. It's a program made by Adobe, the company that creates some of the coolest platforms for creators out there. If you don't have an Adobe subscription yet, no worries. Check out the PDF file in the main folder for a link to a free trial. Sign up for the trial and head over to the Apps section to install After Effects. If you already have an Adobe subscription, simply log into your account on the website or the desktop version, head over to the Apps section and install After Effects from there. And while installing the software, make sure to include the Cinema 4D plugin, because we are going to use it in the course. Once it's installed, we're ready to get started. And to make sure we do not run into any problems down the line, it's a good idea to keep things organized when we're working on an After Effects project. One way to do this is by creating some folders on our computer. So, let's find a spot where we can make the main folder for the course. So let's create a new folder. Great, and now let's call it dim_text animation. Inside that folder, we need to make 3 more folders. The first one is for our After Effects files, so we'll call it AE. The second one is for all the graphics we're going to use, and we'll call that one Assets. And the last one is for any test videos or renders we make as we work on the project, which we'll call Renders or Samples. Now let's open the folder you downloaded from me and navigate to the Assets folder located here. Copy all the assets in this folder to the Assets folder you just created. Next, let's install the fonts we will be using in this course. I will show you how to install fonts for Windows and Mac users. Let's start with this font. Enter the OTF folder. For Windows users, select all the files, right-click, and choose Install for all users or Install. This font is already installed on my computer, so that I won't install it again. For Mac users, open a new folder, and with Finder selected, click on Go. Now click on Go to Folder, and type this line. Then press Enter. This will bring you to the fonts folder installed on your system. And now, copy the OTF files from the course folder, and paste them into the fonts folder. Excellent! And now, let's install the second font. Go to the fonts folder. Enter the OTF folder. Select all the files, right-click, and choose Install for all users or Install. Great! Let's go back to the Assets folder and install the last font. Excellent, let's move on. So, after installing the fonts, it's time to launch After Effects together. Great, so now, we can close this window. And to make sure we all see the same panel arrangement, let's click on Default. Now, like in any editing software, we need to open a new file. To do that, in After Effects, we need to create our first composition. So let's click on New Composition. And now, we'll define the settings for our first composition. Let's name it Text Animation 1. Here, we'll define the format size, which means the size of our first composition. This is the dimensions of the width and height of the composition we create, which will be the size of the final video at the end. Different cases require different resolutions. As shown in the examples, a regular Instagram feed required posts to be 1080 pixels in width by 1080 pixels in height, but the new feed requires a height of 1350 pixels. For stories, reels, and TikTok videos, the size should be 1080 pixels in width and 1920 pixels in height. For YouTube videos, it's best to use a resolution of 1080 pixels in height and 1920 pixels in width, which is a full HD format. If you want to make a 4K video, you'll need to use full HD resolution multiplied by 2. This time we'll work with a format size of 1080 pixels in width and 1350 pixels in height. This is a perfect size for sharing posts on social media. Alright, moving on. Here, we'll choose the frame rate for our animation. What is the frame rate? In the world of video and animation, frame rate refers to the number of individual frames, or pictures, shown per second to create the illusion of motion. Frame rate is measured in frames per second, FPS. The higher the frame rate, the smoother the motion appears. Most common videos and films use a frame rate of 24, 25, or 30 frames per second. But if you want to create an animation for an app or a website, it's better to work on 60 frames per second. When you work with video editing software like After Effects, you have the flexibility to choose the frame rate for your project. It's important to note that the frame rate can affect the file size of the final file. Also, higher frame rates require more storage space and computing power, which can slow down your workflow. In our case, let's set it to 30 frames per second. Next, let's set the duration of our first composition. Let's set it to 10 seconds. And finally, let's select the background color for the composition. Keep in mind that we can easily change all these settings at any stage of the animation later on. And there you have it. You created your first composition. And before we dive in, I want to mention a few important things while working with After Effects. So first, if you see the preview screen like this, don't worry. It's probably because your caps lock key is on. Just turn it off, and everything should be back to normal. Next, when you're working on a project in After Effects, make sure you switch your computer's language to English. This way, all the shortcuts we use will work properly. And if you don't see the background color, then simply click here. Now, if you see the numbers here differently from mine, make sure to zoom out the timeline panel. Now, you can hover your mouse here, hold down the Control or a Command key, and click on the numbers here. These numbers represent the duration of our composition timeline. We can see it in frames or in seconds. Then, if you see the preview screen smaller or larger than mine, simply click here and select Fit. Finally, click here and change the preview quality here to full. Alright, and now, for a better workflow, let's adjust the software preferences. Go to Edit, Preferences. Mac users, you can access preferences this way. Now go to General, and set the software preferences exactly like I did. You can pause the video and continue it when you are ready to move on. In the meantime, I'll continue to the next one. Now, let's use this opportunity to talk about the autosaving feature. This feature saves your work automatically at certain intervals, so you don't lose any progress if the program crashes or something crazy happens. I usually have it set to save every 5 minutes, but you can choose whatever time frame works for you. Alright, moving on. Now, head over to the Script and Expressions section, and check all the boxes as I did. Once you're good to go, hit OK, and we can start the lesson. Note that you don't need to mess with these settings every time you start a new project. You set it once, and you're good to go. Okay, after we have created the first composition and adjusted the software preferences, we need to save the project and give it a name. To do this, let's go to File and click on Save. Now let's find the folder we created for the lesson. Enter the AE folder, and give the After Effects file we are currently working on a name. It can be the same name as our first composition or any other name you prefer. So basically, we are giving a name to the After Effects project we are working on. As you can see, the After Effects file doesn't have a name at the moment. The name we gave earlier, it was the name of the composition we are currently in. And now, we are giving a name to the After Effects file. Alright, so let's click on Save. And now our project has a name. You can locate the After Effects file we saved in the AE folder. When we initially saved the project, we gave it a name, and most importantly, activated the autosave function. And now we are ready to get started. The first thing we will do is import the color palette into the project. To import assets into the project, you can either manually drag them from the computer like that, or you can double-click on the gray area in the project panel. Now let's locate the folder we created for the lesson and enter the Assets folder. Select the color palette and click on Import. So now the color palette is in the project, but we don't see it in the preview screen of the composition we created. To see the color palette in the composition, we need to bring it into the Layers panel located here. To do this, we can simply drag the color palette into the composition like this. And now we see the color palette in the preview screen. Now, we can resize this layer manually by grabbing its edge here, and while holding down the Shift key, we can resize the layer symmetrically. Now release the click on the mouse, and then release the Shift key. Furthermore, we can scale down the layer from the Layers panel using the basic layer transform properties. Click on the small arrow of the layer to see it. And if we open these properties, we can see the basic parameters for every layer in After Effects. Here we have the position parameter, which allows us to move the layer left and right, up or down. Here we see the scale parameter. We can change the value of this parameter manually, or we can click on the value and enter a specific number. Let's write 30 and press Enter. There is also a parameter called Rotation, which allows us to rotate the layer. I will set it back to 0. Finally, there is also the opacity parameter, which controls the transparency of the layer. Okay, and now, after we finish reducing the layer's size, we can close the properties and move the layer here. Let's lock this layer from here to ensure that we can't move it. Additionally, we can hide this layer in the Layers panel by using the Shy function located here. If you don't see the icon, you can click here. Okay, so let's mark this layer as an invisible layer. And to activate the function, we need to click here on the Shy icon as well. And now, we can see it on our preview screen, but it doesn't bother us in the Layers panel. With this, we finished the first part, and we are ready to move on to the next one. See you there.